I knew this was wrong. My name is Manny. Manuel, if you don't know me, or trying to get my attention, or my mom, but everyone just calls me Manny. I'm not what most would call an honest man, nor do I make an honest living. I'm a smuggler by trade, and I'm very, very good at it. I mostly deal in commodities that don't draw too much attention and are welcomed by most folks. Booze, cigarettes, sometimes South American cigars, lots of coffee and tea, spices, and even some jewelry from time to time. And while I occasionally deal in weapons, mostly for my own need, I never deal in anything that's illegal at either end of the drop. At least I hadn't. I was sitting in the passenger seat of my associate's cargo truck, Omar his name is, watching the rain beat down on the windshield. I was frankly grateful for it. This much rain was great cover for traveling the back country like we were, and with what was in the back, we needed to avoid all the heat that we could. Omar turned the truck off the highway and onto one of those old country roads you see in wholesome films from the 90s, or horror flicks from the 70s. I took a steadying breath, because I was pretty damn sure I knew which movie we were in. The truck rumbled on the gravel, and I felt the suspension bounce, which made me worried about our cargo. Again. And to our left, there was this old baling wire fence around a field full of cows, which seemed utterly indifferent to the rain. I envied them. On our right were endless trees, which stretched on for miles, and there might have been another farm peppered in here or there along the way, but where we were was pretty damned remote, which begged the question as to why we were out there. "Hey, what are we doing here?" I asked Omar as the box truck ground its way down the old road. He looked over at me, seeming confused or defensive. I couldn't tell which. "What you talking about, man?" Omar replied with a shrug. "This is the way to the meet." "That's not what I mean," I clarified, nodding as I cracked my neck. "Why the fuck are we doing this?" I fixed him with what I thought was a pretty intense stare, but he just shrugged at me again. "What?" Omar groused, sucking his teeth. Come on, man. This is what we do." "Never like this, man." I threw back at him with another big sigh as I shook my head. "Are you for real right now?" Omar demanded, sounding a touch angry, which was the last thing I wanted. "You're having second thoughts on this? Now?" I had second thoughts when you brought it to me, but by then it was too fucking late, I declared flatly as I shook my head at him. "I figured you were going to come to your damn senses and find somewhere else to unload this mess." If I was honest with myself, the truth was that I hadn't really processed it all until we turned off the highway. But now it was real. We weren't just smugglers now. It was a line that up until that moment I didn't realize I never wanted to cross. "Well, because we need this money, man," Omar insisted in a more commiserating tone. "We owe people. And I don't know about you, but I like to eat." He was right about one thing. We owed a lot of money to people you didn't want to owe money to, which was the only reason I'd even considered this. "You know, we eat just fine," I told him sarcastically, grimacing at him. "You could afford to miss a couple of meals, frankly." "Now fuck you, man," Omar threw back along with the middle finger. "Look, we just do this one thing. Just this one time. And then we're out. We're done. We could go back to running menthols and Marmite if you want." He laughed, and I gave him a chuckle for old time's sake, but I wanted to give it one last try. I couldn't actually do this, could I? "Omar," I started, trying to parse my words and find the thing that would make him turn the truck around. "There is no done with this. Once we do this, we've done it. We're in it, and we can't go back." He didn't say anything for a minute, but kept driving as he stared straight forward. "Well, we've done it already," Omar said hoarsely after a while, then turned to look at me in the eyes. "We already took the job. We picked up the cargo. We're fucking in it now, and I need you to watch my back because if I go out here alone, you and I both know that I'm a dead man." He shrugged and shook his head. The decision for him, at least, had been made, and I knew in my heart that I wasn't going to let him go alone either. We spent the rest of the drive in relative silence, until Omar took a right onto an even older-looking stretch of road, and now there was nothing but trees on both sides. We drove on that road for another half an hour, and then he brought the truck to a stop at a break in the tree line, where there was this muddy driveway that just led into the woods. "Are you for real with this shit?" I asked incredulously when I got a good look at the road he was about to take us down. "This shit just screams I'm about to get me and my good friend who didn't actually do a damn thing killed. I got GPS coordinates from the buyer," Omar told me, shrugging like it was nothing. "This is where the handoff's supposed to be. The instructions said to drive the truck down this path all the way to Lake, where we'll be met." He looked back at me, and we shared a look that told us we knew this was about to go really south really fast, but we didn't really have a choice. "God damn it, Omar," I scolded as I reached into my backpack and pulled out my .357 and slid it in its holster down the back of my pants to hook it up to my belt. Omar similarly held a 9mm in a cargo pocket, and I checked on my ankle carry, which was a tiny-ass 6-shot Ruger that was untested. We gathered ourselves a moment. Omar said a prayer. I just continued to wish that I'd never actually let it go this far, but here we were. He turned the truck down the wide, muddy path, and I watched as the branches, heavy with rain, battered at the windshield. I worried for a minute that they'd break the glass, but it never happened. I worried all the more that we'd get stuck in the mud, and that would screw us very nicely, because then we'd be in the middle of nowhere without a ride. Fortunately, or perhaps not, that didn't happen either. The drive down the heavily overgrown path was long, and I didn't clock it, but I remember feeling genuine relief when the darkly shaded green gave way to gray open skies above a lake. Omar pulled the truck to a stop when we broke through the trees to look around. The rain had stopped, but the skies were still overcast, and the clouds were low. It must have also been late as hell, because it was darker than I had expected. I scanned the shoreline of the lake and almost jumped when I saw 2 groups of figures standing inside the tree line, just a few meters from the shore. The lake was huge, like way bigger than I'd expected it. It was twisty too, and bent like a river. The kind of lake where, no matter where you stood on the shore, you weren't likely to see all the other shorelines. It looked deep, and that kind of made me nervous. An easy place to get rid of, well, anyone really. "Is that them?" Omar asked, peering out the windshield through squinted eyes. I kind of wanted to slap him at that moment. "How the hell should I know, Om?" I asked incredulously as I stared at him in frustration. Just as he was about to speak, a red flashlight shone over to near one of the 2 groups of figures. "That's the signal," Omar explained unnecessarily, and put the truck into gear. "Here we go." He drove out onto the open grass, which already seemed to have tire tracks going this way and that. They didn't look big enough for cars, and when I saw the ATVs and 4-wheelers parked nearby, I understood. As we drew closer, I got a better look at the people who were apparently waiting for us, and there were 2 very distinct-looking groups. On one side were about 6 guys, all carrying a wide variety of death-dealing hardware, from shotguns to ARs and some other shit that I didn't even recognize. They were all clearly some kind of white supremacist, or Satanist, or some shit like that. It was based off their shaved heads and fucked up tattoos. As concerning all of that was, it was the other group that really gave me a pause. 5 men stood about 20 feet away from the others, kind of under a tree. 4 of them wore black fatigues, body armor, assault rifles, and black caps, and screamed either private security, paramilitary, or both. The 5th guy was, well, strange looking. He stood a solid foot over everyone else there, and wore a long black robe or duster that went all the way to the ground. Like his fellows, the only part of his skin that was visible was his head, but unlike the others, he wasn't wearing a hat. He was also bald, wore black sunglasses, and was pale as hell, while his compatriots were of a different pigment. "Jesus, Omar," I whispered harshly as I grit my teeth. "What in the hell have you gotten us into?" "It'll be fine," Omar insisted, sounding extremely doubtful. We just make the exchange. We get our money and we get the hell out of here." "Our money?" I asked, furious with him. "Have you looked out the window, Omar? These guys are Satanists or worse. You see that tattoo on that guy in the front? That means he's literally sacrificed people before." I had to stop myself from full-on yelling at him. "It'll be fine," Omar whispered weakly, his head tilting awkwardly as he came to grips with what was actually going on. "There are children back there, Omar." I growled at him as loudly as I dared, as I thumbed behind us into the truck bed. "Do you think these guys are going to help them?" I sat there glaring at him, wanting to kill him myself. The only thing that softened me was the hopeless look of remorse in his eyes. "What do we do then?" Omar asked, on the verge of tears, as he put the truck in park. I knew that if we just tried to leave, they'd light the truck up like a Christmas tree and take their chances that they wouldn't hit any of the cargo. I was surprised that they hadn't already, but the skinheads seemed to be taking their lead from the other guys, and the tall dude just kept on looking out to the lake for some reason. "We gotta get out of the truck," I told him as I unlocked the door. "But not you. You stay in here and let me do all the talking. If any shooting starts, get the hell out of here if you can." With a deep breath, I opened the door, jumped out onto the wet grass, and walked in front of the truck. "You're late," one of the skinheads, a clean-cut guy who didn't have any tattoos on his head or neck, called out. "Yeah, well, your directions were shit," I shot back, which was my go-to retort for such a statement at a meet. Times were never exact in a business where you might have to cancel at the last minute because you were being followed, and anyone who smuggled anything anywhere knew that. When an asshole tells you that you're late in this business, it's either because he's seen too many movies or is actively trying to intimidate you. "But your life is going to be shit if you don't have my product," the same man told me in a raised voice. One of the others muttered a racial slur, but I saw it as an opportunity to stall. "Well, I'm actually Spanish," I explained in as bored of a tone as I could manage while being scared shitless. "Well, that is to say half Spanish. You see, it's funny, my dad was actually from Spain and my mother—" "No one gives a fuck about your filthy mother," yelled another of the oh-so-friendly fellows from the group of racist psychopaths. "Just give us our product." Unlike his friend, this guy was covered in tattoos from head to toe, one of which was a spider web that covered his whole skull and part of his face. I winced as he spoke, but committed his look to memory. "Enough," came an oddly deep and gravelly voice from the stranger of the two groups. "You are not Omar. Why are we not speaking to him?" I turned to see that the really tall guy had stepped forward and was flanked by those with him, 2 on each side. Unlike his bodyguards, who I could see now packed H&Ks, the big guy was conspicuously unarmed, and I wondered whether he, like me, had something up his sleeve, or if he just had enough clout to scare even these guys. Well, if I'm perfectly honest, you guys are really scary, and he's a bit of a coward. I just told them, only half lying. You'll be dealing with me, and I'm guessing that there seems to be two parties here. One of you is facilitating the buy, while the other gets a share of the product. That's fine. It's in the truck. I trailed off, half out of a desire to obfuscate and half out of guilt. Is Omar with us? The tall guy asked, sounding dubious. My arrangement was with him, and I should like to at least speak with him. He's in the truck too, I muttered, shaking out my shame. I'm gonna have him turn it around so that we can unload. Not waiting for confirmation or permission, I immediately signaled for Omar to turn the truck around. The space of time that it took him to do so was the longest moment of my life, as this crowd of nut jobs and their weird friends stared at me the whole damn time. Everything about this entire scenario was screwed up and just kept getting more and more hopeless by the minute. I realized that I should have just made Omar turn the damn truck around and taken our chances. That I should have and could have retreated from this at multiple points along the way, but didn't. And now here I was, standing in the middle of woods in Kansas, about to be shot to death. Omar finally got the truck into position, and he'd done so intelligently as I'd hoped. He aligned it so that the back port faced the psychos, but aimed the front of it right towards the path they'd driven on. Now, even if I were to get shot, he had at least a chance of getting himself, and everyone else, away. One of the skinheads stepped up to open the truck, and I eased in front of him to block his path. I was taking a risk, but it was a calculated one. With him in front of me, they'd be less likely to shoot. But even if they weren't, they'd at least hit him first. I put a hand up to emphasize my physical communication, but ignored the idiot in front of me, and instead turned to the tall guy who seemed like he was in charge. Now listen, I've heard a lot about your product and Omar, but not any conversation about my money. I declared as boldly as I dared. I'm guessing you're the one that handles that part. It was only then that I really got close to look at this guy, and he was strange looking. His mouth was kinda big and curled angrily at my statement, revealing his teeth, which were oddly pointed. His wardrobe was something out of the Matrix, and I kept expecting him to choke me out like Darth Vader or something. We don't have time for this. The tall cyberpunk aficionado insisted in what sounded less like frustration and more like worry. Give him the money. He gestured, and one of the skinheads brought forth the duffel bag and threw it on the ground. That surprised me. I'd assumed the more mysterious group to be the financiers, and the racist psychos to just own the land, and to make sure that the exchange went smoothly. Now don't you touch it until we get what's ours. The clean-cut skinheads who seemed to be their leader rasped at me, and I raised my hand in acquiescence. Once we have the the tall man started, but a loud splash and a sort of a gurgling roar echoed from the lake, and all eyes but mine moved in that direction. I could not believe my luck, and without so much as a word, I reached back, unholstered my gun, and took aim at Voldemort. The look of surprise he wore was clear, even with his dark shades, and I smiled despite the situation. Now this is how it's going to go, I declared loudly to everyone present. Omar's going to take the truck and leave, and when I'm satisfied that he's far enough away, I'm going to walk out of here. Over my dead body, you fucking... The skinhead leader yelled angrily as he and his compatriots raised their weapons. Now you could keep your money. I cut him off. I'm not that stupid. We could just call this a mulligan. No harm, no foul. Now, I had no idea how I was going to make this work. I just hoped that Omar was smart enough to get out onto the road and wait for me, but at the same time, I didn't really want him to. "I'm warning you, Manuel," the tall man intoned in a calm, steady voice, which scared the hell out of me. "You have no idea of the magnitude of the mistake you're about to make. You are far out of your depth." He took a step forward, gesturing with his weirdly big hands. His words did give me pause, but I assumed that, with the connections this guy likely had, he did background on Omar and learned about me too. "Oh, I am well aware that this whole mess is teetering on the edge of the abyss, but it was dropped in my lap, and now I have to deal with it," I insisted, still holding my gun up and keeping one eye on the skinhead next to me, who was making noises like he wanted to move. "You slavering ape," the tall man growled, his voice suddenly deeper and distorted, like he had a reverb filter on or something. "You have no idea what you will bring upon yourself. You will die. You cannot possibly hope to shoot all of us." He started breathing really heavy and bared his teeth at me, again revealing his huge fang-like teeth. I noted too that the guy who'd come up to check the truck, along with all the other skinheads, seemed to be backing away. But not from me. What the hell had I just rolled up on? Who the hell was this guy? And how did he know my name? Everything in me screamed at me to run, but I knew that the instant I did, they'd unload on me. The only reason I'd not already been shot into oblivion is because I was lucky and got this guy in my sights. I also knew that if I didn't act quickly, the situation would likely go even further south. "No, not all of you," I agreed as I glanced around the clearing and then right back at the bald wannabe vampire. "Just you." I pulled the trigger and shot the son of a bitch right in the face. He screamed and fell backwards to the ground. And that's when all hell broke loose. 3 things happened at once then. First, all 4 of the tall man's bodyguards began screaming in panic, demanding to know what was going on. All of them seemed genuinely confused and suddenly unsure where they were. Second, Omar tried to peel out and skidded dirt in every direction, including on me and the skinhead right next to me. Third, a horrible, utterly huge roar echoed from out the lake, and again pulled everyone's attention to it, including mine. I peered out over the lake and saw what looked like 2 huge tree branches lifting out of the water. I struggled to fathom what could push something so big straight up like that. And that's when both of them curled like noodles in a pot, and I realized that they weren't tree branches. Not at all. Curses came up from both groups then, and someone on the skinhead side decided to open fire at whatever it was out on the lake. One of the militants seemed to take this as an aggressive action, or perhaps just saw them as an obvious threat and opened fire on the neo-Nazis. I was still dumbfounded at what I'd just seen, and didn't realize that the guy in front of me was making a move for one of my guns. The skinhead caught me completely unaware, and smashed me in the head with his fist. His hands closed around my gun, and I thought he was going to get it. Then several 5.56 rounds tore into him. The shots knocked him to the ground, taking my gun with him, and I took off to hide behind a tree, assault rifle fire following me the entire way. Once in cover, I checked myself, and while my head throbbed from that asshole's punch, I hadn't taken a hit yet. Gunfire exploded from behind me from several different sources, and I waited just a moment to see if it would die down. I chanced to glare out to see if Omar had gotten away, only to find that he crashed the damn truck into a tree. I leaned out around the other side of the tree to see that about half of both groups had killed each other. The other halves seemed to be focusing their fire on the lake, or at least they were. And out of nowhere, 2 guys in black stood up, leaving color, and then robotically turned and unloaded their guns into what was left of the skinheads. I snuck behind around the cover of my tree, completely panicked and unsure what to do next. I reasoned that I probably needed to get to the truck and see how bad the damage was. And that's when that horrible roar split the night again, and I reached up to cover my ears on reflex, but then it quieted, as though soothed or placated in some way. I decided to move towards the truck as swiftly and stealthily as I was able. I just needed to get the hell out of there and as far away from that thing as I could, but right as I turned to do so, an impossible strong hand slammed into my neck, and before I even knew what was happening, I was lifted into the air and carried out into the clearing by the throat. When I looked down at what had grabbed me, I thought I was going insane. It was the tall guy, and his face was totally destroyed, but he was somehow still alive. I couldn't imagine how that could be, because I know I shot him in the head. And that's when I saw his real face. His real face. The pale mask of white had been blasted away, and beneath it was a horrid green strip of scales. Those were nothing, though. Nothing compared to his eyes, which were bright red and had slits like a snake. I am so tired of you talking, minuscule creatures, the lizard-faced thing snarled as he carried me past all the bodies of the dead and over to the shore of the lake. His two goons were moving over to the truck, but I could do nothing to stop them. The huge lizard lifted me closer to the lake, and I could hear whatever was in there thrashing wildly, like in a frenzy for its next meal. And out of the corner of my eye, I spotted one of the skinheads who'd been killed, a shotgun still in his grasp. The big guy lifted higher and motioned as if to throw me into the water. You meddle chaotically into matters that don't concern you, and willfully refuse to accept your place in things. The snake-eyed monster chastised me, his voice hoarse and strange as he stared into my eyes. Why? He seemed to be searching me, as though peering right into my head for the answers. His eyes were almost hypnotic, and I found myself wanting to tell him secrets. Things I'd held close, even since I was a child. The sound of a 9mm fire broke whatever hold he had on me, and his attention was drawn to the gunfire. Then the creature in the lake roared even louder, and the snake-eyed man winced and refocused his attention on it, which seemed to calm it, but it also seemed to require his concentration, which was the only window I was going to get. I brought my knee up to slam it into his chin, but more to get my foot closer to my hand than to actually injure him, which I don't think that I had. I snatched my Ruger out of my ankle holster and unloaded half the cylinder into the bastard. When he dropped me to the ground, I scrambled as fast as I could to get over to the fallen shotgun, knowing my backup wasn't going to be enough. Idiot! The snake man screamed at me from the shoreline, almost as loud as whatever was in the lake. Don't you understand? It must be fed. He paused to look into my eyes meaningfully, and I think I finally figured out what was going on here. The trouble was, well, I didn't care. So feed it, I told the snake man as I whipped up the shotgun and fired 3 times in succession, pushing him further and further into the water. I staggered away from him and watched as the tentacles of whatever resided within the lake wrapped around him. As he looked from the wounds I'd given him back up to me, he stepped backwards, seeming to accept his fate. You and your entire misbegotten, ungrateful species are doomed, the snake-eyed man told me cryptically as he was pulled beneath the surface of the lake. I turned away from it, retrieving both my guns, and rushed to help Omar, who was already trying to explain to the refugees who'd been unloaded that they needed to get back into the truck. He was shot badly in the shoulder and I was sure that if we didn't get him to a hospital soon, he was going to die. Nearby, the one black-clad militant guy who was left stood over the body of his compatriot, who Omar seemed to have killed. He'd abandoned his weapon and seemed utterly confused. I don't know why, but I told him to get into the truck, then had Omar get in the back with the others. Something just wouldn't let me leave this guy behind, as he obviously had no idea what was going on. We drove back out to the road without any words spoken, but the ravenous, raging howl of the creature in the lake followed us the whole way. It began raining again, almost immediately, and the radio said something about a tornado setting down near our location. The snake-eyed man's last words echoed in my mind as the ground beneath us started to shake and the world began to tear itself apart. But, like I told you in the beginning, in my heart, I knew this was wrong.